This is the next generation of the internet, blockchain technology, Web3. And I would say alongside AI as another fundamental technological change. And whoever leads and embraces these technologies and regulates them in a responsible way, that is the economy that is going to be dominant in the next generation.
This is our moment to shine. We better take advantage of it and deliver on the promise of the technology today, or else we may not get another chance.
Stablecoins are really different than anything else that's come before them. They are a form of what I call non-credit electronic money. They are the closest thing we have to paper cash in electronic form.
If you're a coffee shop owner here in New York and you've got either suppliers in Honduras or developers who help build your web application in Buenos Aires, you want to be able to pay your suppliers or pay your employees in a way that is fast, efficient, and most importantly, cheap.
Blockchain rails are accessible by everybody. I can have an unhosted wallet. I can have a wallet through Coinbase, which is not a bank. I could also, in theory, someday hold USDC through my bank account.
I think the technical term for the relationship between traditional finance and crypto is frenemy.
This next panel discussion from the Penn Club of New York was fascinating. Given the recent news about Circle's IPO and the fact that I'm a Circle investor, thanks to Linqto's platform, I was all ears listening to Circle's president, Heath Tarbert, go back and forth with a panel featuring Coinbase's chief legal officer, Paul Grewal. Paul shared updates as it pertains to Coinbase's lawsuit with the SEC. However, it sounds like there's light at the end of the tunnel, understanding the SEC is dropping many of its cases with innovative companies like Coinbase, as its case with Ripple also comes to an end. Here's their panel presentation from Wharton's Demo and Innovation Day. Please excuse the audio. There was a technical issue during the recording, but the content is still full of insights, and I'm excited to get this out to my community. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you to the Wharton team for allowing me to attend. Love you mucho.
Heath here, we were just talking about how they're launching their IPO as of yesterday, so don't encourage them to make any forward-looking statements here. That wouldn't go too well. And then we have Paul Grewal from Coinbase, and we have Jai Massari from Lightspark, and Sahel is going to moderate it. So as I say, this feels like almost like a capstone on top of all the discussion we've had about the innovation going forward. So I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. So this panel, we're going to talk about growth and innovation in terms of global expansion of digital assets. And we're going to have three broad topics that we're going to address. One of them will be America's competitive edge in digital assets. Where does the United States sit as compared to what's happening in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia? And we're obviously going to talk about the use of stablecoins to digitize the US. We're also going to talk about the stablecoin infrastructure, looking at legislative outlook in terms of as well, we're potentially the global alignment in those challenges. And we're also going to address market structure. And so the first question to the panel, if I may, is to really talk about, with the rise of the internet's Web3 and blockchain technology, the future of money is, and ways that we can transact are at issue. And we have obviously a few options, among them stable coins and other types of tools. But I'd like to kick off first to really just kind of frame the conversation about where we are in terms of some of the other conversations we've heard this morning about the previous administration and the current administration, and we have a lot of catching up to do. So if I may turn to the panel, perhaps Jai, you can kick us off. And then Heath and Paul can weigh in on this topic.
I think I have good. I have an easier job than either Paul or Heath, given their companies. Mine is a small private company, not involved in any funny capital markets business things. But look, I think it's been a very challenging environment for us lawyers in the last 4 years. We saw very little movement in the regulatory frameworks, even the policy conversations in the United States at the same time. I think we saw a lot more openness outside the United States for companies to be able to go and build different applications. My company, Lightspark, was in a little bit of a special position because we are building payments on the Bitcoin blockchain. on purpose. And a lot of my job as CLO is to make sure that we could build our products and services globally without having to deal with some of the existential questions that I know both Heath and Paul have had to deal with daily, which are things very special to the United States, questions really not being asked outside the United States in the same way, like, is this token a security or not? That just hasn't engendered the same kind of angsty discussion that it did in the United States. And I think, unfortunately, the policy and regulatory focus in the United States in the past 4 years meant that we're now behind and we need to do some catching up. Perhaps we're doing that catching up now. It's going to be a little hard to tell, to be honest, because things are going to be quite frothy. On the legislative and legal front, policy front, at least we're seeing some movement in Congress. We'll talk all about that. But there is a feeling among crypto companies, certainly crypto lawyers like us, that now is the time to build as fast as we can because this environment might not last. And so it's, as we say in crypto, LFG. Heath, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. What I would say is, let's just big picture wise, imagine if the United States did not embrace the internet 30 years ago and did not encourage internet-based companies and technologies, right? And so this is the next generation of the internet, blockchain technology, Web3. And I would say alongside AI as another fundamental technological change. And whoever leads and embraces these technologies and regulates them in a responsible way, that is the economy that is going to be, dominant in the next generation, right? And so the U.S., by not embracing this and being thoughtful about policy regarding it, I think is giving away future world economic leadership, right? And so the last administration, I think, took an anti-technological approach. Not the entire administration, but serious pockets of it. And as a result, as you said, the United States is behind. The current administration understands the promise of what we like to call at Circle the new internet financial system, the merging of the traditional financial system and the internet through blockchain technology. And so it's very promising, but we have to move quickly and we've got to get it done.
Yeah. Imagine 30 years ago if the United States had not only failed to grasp the potential and the opportunity the internet presented, as he rightly called out. Imagine if they declared war on the internet and sought to drive either underground or out of the country altogether each and every one of the major companies seeking to bring these innovations to market and unleash the value for hundreds of millions of people, not just here in the U.S., but billions of people all over the world. That's what we faced 4.5 years ago. To give you some sense of it, in maybe slightly more concrete terms, 4.5 years ago, Coinbase, where I currently serve as the chief legal officer and served as the CLO at the time, we did not have a single full-time employee working on policy or government lobbying. Yeah. We now have many people working on government relations, policy, and lobbying as a result of the last 4 years. Our legal budget, we had a cute little spend of a few $1 million on odds and ends. Fast forward 4.5 years later, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars defending ourselves against our own government to drive us completely out of business. And, against that backdrop of regulation by enforcement, a refusal to even consider issuing rules that we could understand, maybe debate, but ultimately follow as presented, the position of one of the most important pockets of the last administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was there will be no rules, there will be no discussion of how this industry can come into compliance with established norms and register as the SEC claimed. We will simply see you in court. And that was the clear and unequivocal message that was delivered not only to Coinbase, but to many others in the industry as we thought secure reasonable rules, regulatory clarity, and an environment that would at least be tolerable, if not welcoming. That has all changed for all the reasons Heath and Jai have alluded to, and I think as much as there remains so much uncertainty about so many substantive questions in the industry, there is a feeling because there's this is our moment to grab, this is our moment to shine. We better take advantage of it and deliver on the promise of the technology today, or else we may not get another chance.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in, Paul, because Paul's being too modest. And so I'll brag about his work and the work of the Coinbase team for him. Before I became a co-founder of Lightspark, I represented Coinbase and many other crypto companies at the law firm Davis Polk, and so I saw this from the inside. What Coinbase has done, I think Circle is also a part of this in a big way. And it's something to think about for the lawyers in the room. I don't know how many of us there are, but was really innovative in terms of legal strategy. And that's not something that a normal public company has to think about in the same way. Coinbase had to think about how to sue its own regulator as a public company, the SEC, how to engage in productive, meaningful policy conversations at the same time. At the same time, engage in a fight on the political front to change how the world thinks about crypto and how Congress thinks about crypto. I wasn't so sure it was going to be so successful because, we're all skeptics, but it was incredibly successful. And regardless of whatever else you think about going on in the world today, the work that Paul has done and that Heath have done on the policy front, on the government relations front, on the legislative front, and the litigation front, pushing our government to do better and be better for this industry is really quite something, and is really a new way to think about how to conduct a legal group inside a public company. It's really remarkable.
Heath and I have been called many things. Normal is not.
Yes, but really, really something.
I second that, Jai, because I, like many of us in this room who have always been interested in this particular space, I've had a lot of choices in terms of different exchanges, and Coinbase was really one of the preferred platforms, and Circle has also done incredibly well in terms of positioning where we are in the market today. And on that note, rightfully with all the hard work that they've done, and with the grace of the new administration being embracing this technology and innovation, as opposed to what we heard earlier about so much pushback, and to your point, facing our regulators and having to explain to them the underlying technology so that they can actually understand how to draft those rules. But here we are, and so my question to the panel really is, what is the outlook in terms of, we have different tools, we have CD, we have the essentials, the stable coins, tokenizations, and what have you. But let's talk about stable coins for a moment. And let's really, what I'd like to ask is in terms of, if you could comment on the legislative outlook, and if you could also comment on global alignments and what those challenges may also be, that would be great. So perhaps with Paul, we'll start with Paul this time.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with respect to stablecoins. There's no bigger expert than Heath, so I'll keep my comments on the subject brief, and he can correct what I get wrong. I would just point out that it is truly remarkable that as we sit here today, we now have legislation that has moved through the House and the Senate on stablecoins that will provide for the first time a framework for, if not the key piece of the crypto economy as it sits today, but certainly a key piece of it. And just this past week, the House of Representatives in its Financial Services Committee marked up a stablecoin bill and critically approved legislation, passed through committee legislation that would define standards for what do the reserves backing stablecoins have to consist of. What are the requirements for disclosure so that people understand what those reserves are and how they operate? What rights do consumers and others have to redeem stablecoins that they may have secured? Basic elements that don't sound all that complex, but in the previous environment were unimaginable in terms of garnering support across multiple committees in the House, but also in the Senate and across each of the parties. The one thing I'll just underscore before I turn things over to my colleagues on this topic is that This bill that worked its way through the House, like a similar bill that recently made its way through the Senate Banking Committee, was passed on a bipartisan basis. You had Democrats and Republicans agreeing on the basic framework for what sound stablecoin legislation could and should look like in this country. And in case I have to remind you, this is an environment where in Washington and maybe all across the country, Democrats and Republicans can't agree that the sun rises in the east. And yet on this relatively esoteric topic of stablecoins and digital assets, they are agreeing on the foundational element of what sound policy could and should look like. So I think it's important when the moments come along to pause and recognize that we're making progress here, even if there are some important, I think, issues that remain outstanding.
Yeah, so imagine if when you called Philadelphia from here in New York, you had to pay long distance. Or when you wanted to write to your mother or father, you didn't use a text message or an email, but you had to put the letter in the mailbox. Well, all those things were 40 years ago, a way of life. Money still operates that way. Money still operates. In fact, Coinbase has a great commercial that makes that point. Money still operates that way. It still takes 2 or 3 days for checks to clear. This revolutionizes the financial plumbing of the United States. Stablecoins are. So they are, I would say, the foundational element to a Web3 economy, right? And so, but for stablecoins to really make that difference, they need to be stable. So they really need to be backed one for one, dollar for dollar. So they are a safe form of money. And that is what the legislation recognizes and attempts to do. I think it goes very far in doing that. So we support both pieces of legislation, the Genius Act in the Senate and the Stable Act in the House. One of the things, though, that I think is really important is making sure that everyone is on a level playing field. That if you're going to issue and have a stable coin in the United States, being part of our payment system, being part of our daily transactions, being part of our large financial markets, that they're all held to the same rigorous standards. And so I think there's probably a few refinements that need to be done to make sure that not just any stable coin can come into the United States and be treated the same as a stable coin that's subject to the rigors of the Genius of the Stable Act.
I'm going to take a step back. The three of us and four of us up here are true and deep stablecoin nerds. I realize maybe not everyone in the whole world is.
Really?
It's okay. I know, weird, right?
Yeah.
You guys should be. So let me help you. I want to talk just really briefly about why stablecoins are interesting in the first place at all, right? Here in the United States, we have a feeling that we have instant payments all the time, right? We tap to pay with our credit cards. We use Venmo. We use PayPal. So why do we need another way to pay instantly? Stablecoins are really, really different than anything else that's come before them. And the way to think about it is when we're making payments today with credit cards, with Zelle, with bank payment methods, right? We're always using commercial bank money, which always needs to be transferred behind the scenes between commercial banks. You're a creditor of the bank. You really care whose deposits you're holding. I can't just give my bank deposits to Heath. He has to get them processed, from my Wells Fargo account to his Citi account through the back end. Stablecoins are really different than that. They are a form of what I call non-credit electronic money. They are the closest thing we have to paper cash in electronic form. And there's a couple ways to think about that. One is that if I transfer my 10 USDC from my crypto wallet to Heath and his crypto wallet, the act of transferring those stablecoins on chain is final payment of the $10. There's no clearing that has to go on in the back end. The stablecoin moving itself is a way to do final payment. That's not how any of our other payment systems work today. The second is these stablecoins run on open payment systems, not closed payment systems. Bank payment rails, the Federal Reserve payment rails are accessible directly only by banks. Credit card rails, only by banks. Blockchain rails are accessible by everybody. I can have an unhosted wallet. I can have a wallet through Coinbase, which is not a bank. I could also, in theory, someday hold USDC through my bank account. all of those methods are valid. What that means is you have a lot more diversity in the service provider ecosystem for stablecoins that should, if we believe economists, should increase competition, therefore increasing the types of payments use cases that are made available by stablecoins, and in my perhaps unicorns and rainbow world, actually enable new kinds of economic activity because we are going to be able to figure out faster and better ways to make payments to each other. So that's really what's at stake, and I'm going to tie back to the legislation. I know that was super cool. What the U.S. legislation does, as with legislation in Europe and other places, is lay the foundational groundwork so that stablecoins will have the trust of the public. Money is a vibes thing, right? It will have the trust of the public as good cash. Once we have that baseline, we can then really build from it. And to me, that's what's really important about this legislation. It's not only about deciding which stablecoins can issue or not in the US. It's actually building trust in the stablecoins that are available for people so they can use them interchangeably across platforms. We're not stuck with Venmo to Venmo, Zelle to Zelle, ACH to ACH. Anyone can pay anyone else on the platform. And now I will.
Such a great job of explaining that, Jai. Can you also comment how they distinguish, let's say, tokens? So tokenization or even the central bank digital. How is that?
Yeah. So there's a few different flavors of tokenized money, I'll call it. One are CBDC, it's a liability of the central bank, issued by the central bank. Tokenized deposits, which are on-chain representation of commercial bank deposits. Remember, as I explained, those are credit money, unsecured liabilities of the bank that issues the deposit, has this whole clearing infrastructure required behind it. And then stablecoins, which are, as envisioned by the bills, fully reserved, non-credit money, bearer instruments that can be transferred on-chain as actual settlements. Yeah.
So on that note, the third topic within this sort of umbrella is to talk about with respect to market structure. And so we have these specific stable coins, and then I'd like the panel to comment with respect to primary or secondary markets and checks and balances in general. And so with respect to issuers and exchanges, and then to really sort of determine the use cases, if you will. Heath, if I can ask you.
And are we talking just stable coins?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, obviously you want to make sure that anyone who's issuing stable coins, is consistent with everything that was just said, that they truly are backed one for one with high quality liquid assets. They're not highly leveraged. They're not algorithmic, particularly if they're going to be used as a substitute for cash. And then, of course, I think they can be listed as USDC is listed and other stable coins on an exchange like Coinbase. So everyone in the public can buy and sell them. What are the use cases? Well, in many ways, the use cases are every single use case today for exchanges. But let me just give you a few ideas. How many people in here send money overseas, have overseas friends, relatives, and about somewhere between 4% and 6% you pay? But with a stable coin, you can send that same money, again, instantaneously, as safely and securely as you can send an email for virtually nothing. You just have to pay the gas fees on the blockchain. So that's a huge development. But there's also the more fundamental use of stable coins. Think about all the credit card exchange fees, merchants accepting it. Many of you in this room are entrepreneurs. You're going to be accepting payments for your companies and moving funds back and forth. Stable coins will save you a ton of money. There's also the global financial system. All of our largest clearinghouses. My job for a few years was to oversee and supervise the largest derivatives clearinghouses in the world, the CFTC chair. Well, there's a huge amount of intraday credit risk. All the things that you were just saying about having to wait a couple of days for money to flow back and forth, now it can flow instantaneously. That will bring the risk of the system down. So essentially, the use cases for stable coins are as wide as the mind can imagine. And AI, for example, there's going to be all these AI agents. Well, stable coins are going to be the exchange of AI, right? So there's a ton of applications that I'm not even smart enough to think about. all of you will do that as part of the Wharton Accelerator as you guys go out and establish your businesses.
And on that note, this is a question really for Jai. How do you feel about interest bearing?
So how's being sneaky here? So there's this idea and a debate going on right now in the crypto community and in Congress about whether stablecoins should inherently be able to pay interest to the holders, right? Stablecoin issuers generate income based on the assets that they're holding to back the stablecoins that they issue. Can they share that? Is the question with holders. Today, both the Stable Genius says no. I personally think that's probably the right answer for now. The point that I would make is that once a stablecoin is inherently yield bearing, it's not going to be stable anymore. And it's also going to feel a lot more like credit money, not like the non-credit money that will be ideal for payments use cases. That's not actually to say we shouldn't have yield bearing stablecoins. It's actually not at all what I think. We can for sure have those as well. But they're a different animal than what do we call them? The qualified payment stablecoins contemplated by the bills. They're just something different. Just like a balance in a checking account is something slightly different than a balance in a savings account. We can have different flavors of stablecoins, but yield-bearing stablecoins will not be stable and will be harder to use as fungible money because you'll care more about who's issuing them. And I think that makes it more challenging to put them into my particular worldview about the potential for stablecoins.
Yeah, and that is the state of the world today. What I would suggest is the world we want to get to tomorrow is one where, at its option, not certainly by fiat or declaration, but at its option, an issuer of a stablecoin, whether it's a Circle or anybody else, has the opportunity, the right, the option of sharing at least a portion of that yield that's generated by those dollars sitting in a bank account or being held as treasuries with the people who supplied the dollars. I mean, that's what a stablecoin ultimately is. If you think about it, if you're a coffee shop owner here in New York and you've got either suppliers in Honduras or developers who help build your web application in Buenos Aires, you want to be able to pay your suppliers or pay your employees in a way that is fast, efficient, and cheap, and most importantly, cheap. And as Heath points out, stablecoins afford a way to do that. Well, if you are bringing dollars to a network in order to mint those stablecoins, to make payments in that way, it, I think, makes good sense that in certain circumstances and under strict supervision and all that, the rewards or interests that are generated by those dollars sitting in the issuer's account be available to you, the party or entity or the individual who gave rise to that value in the first place. I do think there is a way to manage that. I don't think it is an issue that should preclude or prevent passage of the current stablecoin legislation, because as we've talked about, that technology is not only ready today in this model, right, or scenario I've painted of a coffee shop owner with employees and suppliers isn't fantasy. That's the reality today, but we need a structure under law that recognizes that so we can see greater adoption and greater innovation around it.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes, and I'd like to ask just a few more questions. And then perhaps we'll take a few questions from the audience. My first question to the panel is, there's been a lot of talk, and some of this we may have already gotten into, but there's been a lot of talk about how the U.S. Treasury-backed stablecoins are in the best interest of our national security. Would you feel comfortable commenting on that? Please, we'll start.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different aspects to this. So the first is just the national security generally and the stability of the U.S. economy. The United States enjoys what the French finance minister maybe 40 or 50 years ago characterized as an exorbitant privilege by having the U.S. dollar be the reserve currency of the world, and normally those dollars are held in the form of U.S. treasuries. And so the fact that dollar-issued stable coins are going all over the world, and they are proliferating the dollar in areas where people can't have dollarized bank accounts. So in other words, expanding our dollar base expanding our treasuries, that in and of itself is a huge boon to our national economic and sort of national security, defense type security. It allows us to have a stronger economy, stronger infrastructure, stronger military. More specifically on the product itself, once cash moves out of our banking system and finds its hands into North Korea or Iran, it's gone forever. With a stable coin like USDC, we can see every single USDC, and there's more than 61 million, there's $61 million, but of course USDC is fractionalized as well. We can see every single bit of USDC in every wallet around the world, and the moment it falls into the hands of a sanctioned wallet, an OFAC, where OFAC, our US government, says that's a terrorist wallet, we can shut it down. That's a huge advantage, I think, technologically, why this reinforces national security.
Can't do that with bags of cash last time I checked.
No, you cannot.
Can't do that at Swiss banks either. Can't walk out with a bag of cash.
I'll make a counterpoint, though I 100% agree with everything that he said. I think it's really, those are all really, really important points. I think another way that stablecoins are different is they actually create a new way for new kinds of people to issue U.S. dollar denominated money. So if you think about how U.S. dollars were issued abroad today, it was largely U.S. and non-U.S. banks issuing commercial dollar-denominated commercial bank deposits outside the United States, all connected back to U.S. infrastructure through swap lines, central bank money, clearing facilities, payment facilities, all centrally operated, with the U.S. government having a hand in all of those, right? Stablecoins are a little bit different. All you really need, I'm simplifying, I know, Heath, your business is more complicated. All you really need is a big pile of U.S. treasuries in order to now issue U.S. dollar denominated money on chain. There is no reason that another country couldn't issue dollars. Stable value based on a big pile of treasuries. There's no reason lots of other people couldn't do the same thing. I think this is, with every innovation, there are new risks that arise, and I think this is one that we haven't really started to grapple with. Of course, we can grapple with it, including by passing sensible legislation that regulates how these things are done and allows consumers and users in general to distinguish different kinds of stablecoins from each other. But it is kind of an interesting new thing.
It's a great point, if I may just quickly interject. So the European Union has actually squarely addressed this issue. And what they have said is, if you are issuing a euro-denominated stablecoin anywhere in the world, right, you're totally outside the Eurozone, we are going to deem that issued in the European Union, and you're subject to European regulations. In other words, you want to use our currency and say it's a euro, you play by Brussels rules. The United States isn't taking that path, and we're not necessarily suggesting they do. My own view is that, and I would probably say the Circle view as well, is that at the very least, we should require anyone overseas issuing something that they call a dollar, even if it's not going to touch the hands of U.S. citizens, so it's not going to be subject to the prudential regulation of the Genius or Stable Act. They should nonetheless comply, at the very least, with our anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist law. So they should apply, the Patriot Act should apply if you're saying something's a dollar, but maybe not necessarily the prudential requirements if you're not in the United States. But like I said, the European Union has gone that step farther and said, no, it all applies. You call it a euro, guess what? You're going to apply, but you're going to use our rules.
The jurisdiction trump. Would you like to comment on that, Paul? On this query?
Well, the only thing I'll just add very quickly is that it is, I think, striking that to date, if you look at what fiat currencies back most stablecoins globally, it's not even close. The U.S. dollar dominated that landscape and that competition by a mile. It's really remarkable. And I just call that out because I do think that as policymakers here in the States consider all these hard questions, I hope they bear in mind that that unique advantage that we enjoy, in addition to our status as the reserve currency of the world and all of that, is not something to be taken for granted. Just because it is the case that the dollar is the currency of choice globally today doesn't mean that it will be the current day choice tomorrow. Make smart choice about how to extend the U.S. dollar into a digital marketplace, into a digital world. The way the current law simply
We're going to take a couple questions. Please.
Curious from your insider's perspective, how is traditional finance pushing back against the momentum that you described at the beginning? Tell us more about that tension that's playing out in the new administration and how it may impact you.
I think the technical term for the relationship between traditional finance and crypto is frenemy. We partner very closely with many traditional institutions because the plumbing and the pipes of the system today remain critically important as onboarding infrastructure and clearing settlement infrastructure for the things that we're doing in crypto. So, for example, if you want to turn a dollar into a stable coin, by normal means, you have to have a bank partner to be able to do that. But there are obviously real threats to the traditional financial system and its actors' business models that are posed by a lot of these innovations that we're talking about, and that has not escaped their notice and attention. And as an industry, we are still relatively young. I like to point out that the white paper that gave birth to this, Satoshi's original musings for Bitcoin, was only published 15 years ago. There are lobbyists for the bank industry that have been working on particular pieces of legislation in Washington for more than 15 years. So we have a long way to go to catch up with that muscle and influence in Washington. And yet, I think we're getting there very quickly. And I think it's important that we hash out this debate in open. It's why markups on legislation are so important, because it airs out for public view and scrutiny so much of the conversations that are taking place much more quietly behind closed doors in ways that I think are much less productive.
We're going to take one more in the interest of time, please.
Yeah,
Make the pitch, Heath. This is your chance.
I think it's as easy as creating a wallet and saying we now accept USDC or whatever other stable coins. And then there are ways on the back end where you can have a Coinbase account, depending on, we have institutional accounts. So if you're large enough, you can even get a Circle account. But either way, you'd be able to exchange the USDC back and forth from other players in the system. So it's not very hard, right?
No.
Very simple.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank Wharton